The church never existed in the Old Testament. The church never existed when Jesus was on earth. There was no church in the Old Testament. There was no church in the Gospels. The church came into play from the resurrection. When Jesus rose from the dead as the first begotten, the Bible calls the church of the firstborn. The church of the firstborn. So there was no church until Jesus was born again. The born again experience of Jesus was his resurrection from the dead. When he rose from the dead, his resurrection gave birth to an institution called the church. The book of Acts says the church which he purchased by his own blood. So without the shedding of the blood, there is no church. So the church therefore is a byproduct of his death, his burial, and his resurrection. Therefore, if the place is a church, the message of that place should be death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. If that is not preached, it is a social center. If the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ is not preached in a place, it is a social club. What makes it the church of God is that it is born out of his death, his burial, and his resurrection. So the doctrine, the foundation of the church is his death, his burial, his resurrection, because it is his death, his burial, and his resurrection that gave birth to the church. Many places called church are not churches. They are just gatherings of religious people. Religion is not the church. The church is not religion. When Jesus was here, there was religion, but there was no church. Oh, the religious leaders met every Saturday. They gathered in the synagogues, but there was no church, because there was no church until he died, was buried, and he rose. It is called the church of the firstborn. So until the firstborn was born, there was no birth of the church. So the church is birthed on his death, his burial, and his resurrection. Therefore, the doctrine of the church should be his death, his burial, and his resurrection. Now, if that is not what is preached, it is not the church. Please get it right. Don't let anybody use you to eat akara. Now listen, I don't care the name of the person on that altar, and I don't care what titles he carries. He is not Jesus Christ. I don't care his name, I don't care his titles, and I don't care how many thousands of people are gathered in that social club. It is not the crowd that makes the church, it is the message. The message. The message is called doctrine. It's not a crowd. You can have 1 million people gathered in a building and they are all serpentine children. Jesus called them brood of vipers, children of the devil. How do we know who the children of the devil are? I'm going to show you in a few minutes. And it is my job as your pastor to teach you. Ephesians chapter 4 verse 11. Put it up. Ephesians 4:11. And he gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers, the fivefold ministry. It is Jesus, the owner of the church, that appoints the people to pastor the church. Nobody just becomes a pastor. He gave some. He didn't give all. All of us cannot be pastors. He gave some. He gave. When did he give? Go back. Previous verse 7. But unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. 8. Wherefore he saith, when he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. That is, when he rose from the dead, because he was birthing an institution called the church, he had to release the gifting that will pilot the church. When he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. He didn't give gifts to men until he took captivity captive. So the message of the church is not about the activities of Satan and bondage. No, he first of all took captivity captive. When he has finished with the adversary, he now released gifts, and the mission of these gifts is to reveal the owner of the church to the church.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
See, I hear you.
I hear you, sir.
Next verse. Now that he ascended, what is it? But that he also descended first. So that you know we're talking about his death, his burial, and his resurrection. He descended first into the lower parts of the earth. That's when he went to hell, which is actually Hades, the place of darkness. He led captivity captive, and to show that the devil has no more importance, he gave gifts to men. I'm teaching. He descended first into the lower parts of the earth. Verse 10. He that descended is the same also that ascended up far above all heavens, that he might fill all things. That is nothing without him. So any preaching that excludes Christ is not of Christ, because he fills all things. He's the center. It's a Christocentric message taken from a Christocentric book. It is centered on Christ. Shout hallelujah. Now next verse. And he gave some. On his ascension, he distributed gifts to some people. Not everybody. Not everybody. There are specific people he gave gifts to. Why? So that they can represent him to his church. They can introduce him to his church. So those he gave gifts, the gifting is for them to know him.